Everything with Iran is escalating. More missiles are being fired, more are getting through, more countries are involved, and more casualties are coming out. In fact, we have the first American losses of the conflict announced just a few hours ago. U.S. Central Command put out a statement saying as of 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time on March 1st, 3 U.S. service members have been killed in action and 5 are seriously wounded as a part of Operation Epic Fury. Several others sustained minor shrapnel injuries and concussions and are in the process of being returned to duty. As they mentioned, we don't have a unit, a branch of service, or a location to where those casualties occurred, pending the notification of next of kin. Now, this is significant, and we're going to have to see if this changes U.S. calculations in the coming days. I would expect that we're going to see an uptick in domestic pressure to pull back, scale back, or even shut this military operation off entirely. This is just a very different scenario. For all of the operations carried out at any point around the world, the minute you lose service members, it changes the discussion. Venezuela, I don't know how many people would have been on board with that prior to the operation, but in retrospect, we can say it didn't cost any American lives. That's a different calculation. Again, this is going to change how people view what is happening in Iran right now. I would expect to see an increase in domestic pressure on the Trump administration starting today. Now, this is part of the Iranian strategy, is to not necessarily defeat the U.S. military, but wear us down. And one of the ways they're trying to do that is to force our allies in the region to ask us to stop. And we're seeing that in the Iranian strategy as they fired missiles and drones across the entire Middle East in the last couple of days. Intel Schizo over on Twitter put together a roll-up here. And if my math is right, we've got 13 different countries involved right now in this war. I mean, this is a full-on regional war. There's speculation that additional Middle Eastern countries might start participating in direct strikes against Iran. Right now, 13 nations have either attacked Iran or have been on the receiving end of Iranian attacks. That makes up the bulk of the numbers here. Of course, we have the United States and Israel carrying out direct strikes on Iran, Iran attacking the United States and Israel. In addition, Iranian munitions have impacted in Cyprus, Oman, Bahrain, Iraq, again, Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the United Arab Emirates. Spray and pray. They are firing drones and missiles everywhere. Again, this is part of the Iranian strategy. Try to get these countries to say, enough already. We can't do this. Ask the United States to dial this back. In total right now, and this is the low end, again, according to Intel Schizo, this was as of this morning. We've already seen additional launches since then, but as of this morning, 465 Iranian missiles and more than 357 total drones that have been launched, some intercepted, some made their way through to targets just in the first 24 hours of this operation. And they are causing casualties. All right, so we know the United States has now announced that 3 of our service members have been killed, 5 more wounded, and I think they said 20 or so have been concussed, light injuries that are in the process of making their way back into service. That shouldn't come as a shock when we see the videos of strike after strike getting through in a variety of locations. Now, we don't know if those service members were on a military installation or not when the strikes took place, right? There have been a number of strikes carried out against civilian infrastructure across the Middle East. And the UAE has now said that 3 people have died in strikes inside of their country, along with 58 that have been wounded. Kuwait says that 1 person was killed and 32 injured as a result of Iranian attacks so far. And Israel earlier today suffered a mass casualty event as an Iranian missile impacted in Beit Shemesh. The information here continues to come out, but the last update I saw was that 9 Israelis had been killed, more than 20 had been injured. However, search and rescue operations were still ongoing, and they expected both of those numbers could increase. Now, that is the result of Iranian strikes so far, branching out, trying to hit anything and everything they possibly can. But U.S. and Israeli operations have not slowed, and I would argue they picked up in intensity in the last 24 hours, or in the last 12 hours, really. Interesting one here is it looks like the United States may have flown B-2 bombers, stealth bombers across the Atlantic to carry out strikes inside of Iran and made their way back home. The initial announcement of this, and it's been now reported across a number of different outlets with confirmation from U.S. defense officials, the initial announcement I saw came from Defense Geek over on X to give you an idea of just how dialed in some of the open source intelligence accounts are in this day and age. But he said, at last, I can confirm that overnight, a flight of 4 B-2 Spirit bombers flew nonstop from the United States to Iran to attack targets belonging to the regime. The Times of Israel said a U.S. defense official confirmed to Fox News that the American military used B-2 stealth bombers in recent strikes on Iran. They said they flew round trip from the U.S. and dropped dozens of 2,000-pound bombs on underground ballistic missile sites in Iran, adding they flew from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, but did not use the 30,000-pound bunker busters used in last year's attack on the Iranian nuclear facilities. So again, it looks like the focus here was going after some of the missile production sites and underground storage facilities, not necessarily the nuclear program. We still haven't really seen the nuclear program specifically targeted. Now, something with those B-2s is they don't have to only carry a few really big bombs. They can carry a lot of smaller bombs. So it looks like in this case, dozens of 2,000-pound bombs striking those underground facilities across the country. I've not really seen any footage at this point, some blurry satellite imagery suggesting what might have been hit, but we'll keep an eye out for those battle damage assessments and update you as soon as we have it. We also got news from U.S. Central Command that they went after and maybe sunk a vessel of the Iranian Navy, the first, I believe, in this conflict, first in quite a while. CENTCOM said an Iranian Jamaran-class corvette was struck by U.S. forces during the start of Operation Epic Fury. The ship is currently sinking to the bottom of the Gulf of Oman at the Char Bahar Pier. There's also been some speculation that a U.S. submarine may have struck an Iranian vessel. Put that in the full speculation bucket at this point. It's one of those where I'm trying to track back the rumor and everything. It looks like unofficial source, some anonymous account said it, and it spiraled to the point of being reported. We do know the U.S. has submarines in the area. They could be used, but I've not seen any evidence, again, outside of unofficial kind of anonymous accounts spreading that. But either way, it does look like, at the very least, an Iranian corvette has been hit. Now, the Israelis have picked up operations as well. We are getting a lot more detail from the Israeli side as these operations play out. They said for the first time in Operation Roar of the Lion, the IDF attacked targets of the Iranian terror regime in the heart of Tehran. Over the past 24 hours, they say their Air Force has conducted extensive attacks to establish air superiority and open the way to Tehran. A short while ago, they added that the Israeli Air Force struck 2 Iranian terror regime F-5 and F-4 fighter jets at an airport in Tabriz in western Iran as the jets were preparing for takeoff. So again, it looks like the opening salvo, the first 24 hours or so, were focused both by Israel and the United States on, of course, going after high-value targets. We did get the confirmation yesterday, of course, that Ali Khamenei was killed in an Israeli strike right at the opening of hostilities. But it does look like the United States and Israel were focused, as you might expect, on clearing the path for follow-on strikes. So going after air defense radars, going after missile launch sites, and as Israel will show here in a second, going after command and control to disrupt the ability for Iran to carry out retaliatory strikes, as well as some of the mobile and stationary missile launchers used to carry out strikes against Israel. In terms of the command and control strikes, Israel said, quote, a short while ago, the Israeli Air Force, guided by IDF intelligence, completed an additional wave of strikes targeting dozens of command centers and headquarters belonging to the Iranian terror regime. As a part of the strikes, the headquarters of the General Staff for Internal Security was struck. It served as a command and control hub responsible for linking the senior command echelon with the Iranian regime's security forces on the ground and for directing the brutal repression of the Iranian people. Additionally, the Thar Allah headquarters, which was used as a defense command center in Tehran against military targets, was dismantled. And we are getting a lot of footage showing pretty significant strikes across Tehran, daylight strikes as well, which is notable. Couple of key points here. First off, it does look like the Israeli Air Force is now operating relatively freely over Tehran, so that gives you an idea of what the Iranian air defenses look like just 24 hours into this fight. The terminology to use here would not be air dominance. I'd hesitate to even use air superiority, except for maybe some corridors in the west. We're working towards that, I would say. Notably, we're not seeing a lot around the effects of U.S. strikes. So we got some limited footage yesterday showing U.S. attacks. A lot of it looked like it was carried out with standoff munitions, either missiles fired from aircraft or tomahawks fired from ships at sea. Not seeing a lot as to the effects of U.S. bomb strikes in Iran quite yet. We might get more of that later today. Israel added that they started to go after the Iranian missile production, and they have some interesting stats here to give you an idea of just how significant this aspect of the Iranian defense industrial complex has become. Said prior to the launch of Operation Rising Lion last June, Israeli intelligence identified activities of the Iranian terrorist regime, indicating a significant increase in the pace of missile production, including an attempt to produce approximately 8,000 missiles by the year 2027. Israeli assessments prior to Operation Rising Lion indicated that the regime possessed an estimated stockpile of 3,000 missiles. The achievements of that operation reduced their arsenal by hundreds of missiles and prevented the production of at least 1,500 additional ballistic missiles. Before the launch of that operation, the regime's missile production stood at dozens of ballistic missiles per month, with a clear acceleration in its recovery pace. In addition, the regime dedicated substantial efforts to fortify its underground production infrastructure. So a couple notes there with the numbers. They said prior to the strikes in June, they estimated that Iran's total stockpile was around 3,000. If we're talking about dozens produced per month since then, I think we can essentially rounding error down to around 3,000 when you account for what was launched during that operation. So if we assume that Iran came into this with, say, 2,500 ballistic missiles, we know they've been targeted already by Israeli and American strikes. But when we look at the total number utilized, what do we have earlier? Just shy of 500 missiles so far used. On or about at this point, on the high side, maybe 25% of the missile arsenal. On the low side, if those numbers were all accurate, maybe closer to 15%. Again, to give you an idea of how many missiles Iran likely has at their disposal that they could stretch out over a significant period of time to keep these strikes ongoing. And that's going to raise into question the interceptor quantities in the United States and Israel. More on that here in a second. Now, turning to the Iranian attacks, the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Ali Larijani, said, quote, "To the countries of the region, we are not seeking to attack you, but when the bases located in your country are used against us, and when the United States carries out operations in the region relying on those forces, then we will target those bases. For these bases are not a part of the land of those countries, rather they are American soil." And we're seeing Iran kind of shift this messaging to the Middle East countries, the Gulf nations, saying we are not attacking you, Saudi Arabia, we're attacking the American base on your soil. I think that probably would work so long as all of the munitions are actually landing inside of American bases. That's not what we're seeing. So no doubt, just today we had what appears to be additional footage showing strikes on the U.S. naval base in Bahrain, as well as the American base in Kuwait. There's been as much, if not more, footage. The French naval base in the region was struck as well, but there's been even more footage showing drones impacting in pretty clearly civilian areas and airports as well. That is probably not going over super well with a lot of the Middle East nations. The Iranian Foreign Minister IRGC said, quote, "Our military units are currently operating independently and in isolation following previously issued general directives." That kind of tracks with our estimates leading up to the onset of hostilities, based off of how Israel was likely to go after some of the key Iranian leadership figures. We assumed that a lot of orders would be pushed down the chain of command. It makes it that much harder for Israel to stop every order along the kill chain, and higher likelihood that Iran is going to be able to loose some munitions even if leadership figures were killed. So that checks out, and it does kind of line up with the attacks, the Iranian responses that we've seen so far. Now, I do want to mention something that's a little bit kind of non-traditional, maybe, right? Irregular style response here. We saw some embassies attacked and consulates attacked last night. So in Pakistan, and this was the most significant one, I believe it was in Karachi, the U.S. consulate was attacked after the killing of Khamenei was announced. And there were a number of protesters, rioters, whatever you want to call the term here, they are attacking the consulate, right? And my understanding, the initial reporting is that U.S. forces in self-defense were forced to open fire, and that led to the death of 9 of these protesters and wounding 20 more. That's a serious event, right? For that to happen anywhere at any time, but it might be an indication of kind of something bubbling under the surface here that could spiral in a number of different places around the world. On top of that, we got footage of more protesters, rioters, again, whichever terminology you want to use here, appearing to try to breach into the green zone in Baghdad, where the U.S. embassy and the U.S. kind of government presence in Iraq is located. I would not be shocked if we see more protests like that at U.S. embassies and consulates around the world. Now, earlier today, Iran announced for the first time that they targeted a U.S. aircraft carrier, saying they went after the Abraham Lincoln with 4 ballistic missiles. This was a report put out by the Public Relations Department of the IRGC, saying that additional information and news related to the operation will be announced later. Haven't heard any more from Iran, but we did get CENTCOM responding to this, saying that's false. But the language used here is actually important. So the CENTCOM said the Lincoln was not hit. The missiles launched didn't even come close. The Lincoln continues to launch aircraft in support of CENTCOM's relentless campaign to defend the American people by eliminating threats from the Iranian regime. So if we're reading between the lines a little bit there, it sounds like Iran did try to target the carrier, and those missiles were either intercepted or missed the carrier by a wide margin. That's very similar to some of the language we saw during the campaign against the Houthis, Rough Rider, I believe it was called, about a year ago at this point. So the Houthis would regularly say, we targeted or we attacked the American ships in the region. They would come short of saying we hit. So their mission was they would have liked to hit a U.S. ship, no doubt, right? But they would pretty regularly say, we attacked or we fired missiles at. The U.S. response would be very similar to this. The missiles were not even close. So again, kind of reading between the lines, it looks like that attack did take place, which is notable that Iran is, at least for the time being, choosing to go after U.S. naval assets in the region as well. And that might be partially because they do seem to be pursuing a strategy of actually closing down the Strait of Hormuz. We got notifications earlier today that a Palau-flagged oil tanker under U.S. sanctions, so interesting dynamic here, was hit off the coast of Oman. This is the Skylight tanker. We got a couple different videos and pictures showing that pretty significant damage. It looks like it had a 20-person crew. There were at least 4 of the crew that were injured. A number of Iranian and Indian citizens on board that were evacuated. I don't think anyone was killed in that strike, but notably, it looks like this vessel was actually sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury in 2025 as part of the Iranian shadow fleet, so a vessel used to smuggle Iranian oil out over the past couple years. So that's one. It sounds like there might have been another report of an additional tanker being hit, and we are seeing some of these large logistics companies starting to say we are pausing movement through this area or we're taking it easy. Either way, this does appear right now to be having the short-term effect of, at the very least, slowing transit through one of the major economic hubs around the world, if not stopping it altogether. Now, in terms of what to watch for here in the coming days, I do think the 3 American casualties are going to spark a lot of conversation here in the United States. No doubt every life is important. Every loss is a tragedy. So I don't mean to downplay this by any means. But again, when we look at past military operations, there's a big line that is drawn shy of U.S. service members being killed in action. Even when we have people wounded, it does tend to get a little more attention. But we've crossed into this new threshold where people talking about, is going into Iran, is bombing Iran, is this in the U.S. best interest? You're going to have a lot of folks that would have been on board with regime change and the elimination of their nuclear program and stopping support from their proxies, all that stuff. Again, think Venezuela. People that maybe were not on board that afterwards said, you know what, fine. Because there were no casualties, because there were no, or in Venezuela's case, no killed in action. Okay, fine. We were able to push that button and accomplish our objectives with limited loss, right? So there were certainly some wounded in action. The Medal of Honor recipient, right? Crazy story in Venezuela, but no Americans killed. Now that has happened, expect a significant uptick in pushback from people that not wanting us involved in Iran in any way, shape, or form. That will probably trigger even more commentary, even more pushing from the camp that does want U.S. intervention in Iran. And I think the reason you're going to see that is because there might be the possibility right now that we have seen Khamenei killed, a number of senior officials already taken out, the Iranian missile production facilities have been hit. It's not the craziest thing in the world that President Trump, seeing U.S. casualties, says, I don't want to go further. We'll call this a victory and step away. We saw something similar with the Houthis, right? That was a draw. We walked away. It was costing us a lot of money in terms of missile production and interceptor production. And at some point, we just said, enough's enough. Let's move on. You have to think that that is one of the contingencies being briefed to President Trump right now, is to declare victory and move on. Anyone in favor of regime change in Iran or really trying to stamp out this regime once and for all is likely to be pushing back in the coming days to make sure that President Trump actually follows through with this campaign. Now, everything that we're seeing from the Israelis, from the United States, and from the Iranians is that more strikes are set to occur. There's really nothing suggesting that this is stopping, slowing, or anywhere near completion. Iran does tend to launch most of their munitions at night, especially their ballistic missiles. So the coming hours here will give us an idea of how many missiles they're sitting on. Are they starting to maybe ration those a little bit? And maybe most importantly, how they're adjusting their targets. So we now have seen that Iran has gone after U.S. military bases, supposedly U.S. military vessels, the aircraft carrier. They've certainly gone after Israel, and they've gone after allied nations, striking civilian targets in a number of those. What does that look like as this campaign progresses? I think there's probably a good argument to be made that we're going to see more attacks against soft targets, so civilian infrastructure, and less going after military targets. But again, the next couple hours and then into the night will give us an idea of the Iranian strategy as it sits right now. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.